Welcome to the last session in this Leading Self series. This one is on the topic of pursuing mastery. I really encourage you to watch the others if you have skipped any. They're ultimately going to build into mastery. Now, we talk about time hacks for being inwardly sound. If you remember from our previous conversations, we said being inwardly sound and others focused are the two things that drive more effectiveness than anything else in a leader. And it has to start with inwardly sound. But we're all so busy. So where do we put small amounts of time so that we get the productivity, the drive, the time back to continue to work on improving ourselves and improving our business? Well, one of those was margin. We did that in the session 7. We really focused and introduced the idea of how do we develop more purpose in session 8. And in this one, we're going to deliver a whole session on the idea around mastery. Now, there is perhaps nothing that will save you more time and more energy than getting really good at what you do. One of the things that you should think about each year is what are the 3 things I need to get the best in the world at in my job? That will allow me to have much, much more impact. It'll also give me a lot of time back. And the good news is this is all well studied. So we can talk about what happens in areas where we're trying to improve skills. There is something called the competency ladder. It's called different things, competency learning model. But the idea is performance improves on the journey to mastery. It's very predictable. It starts out typically with us discovering that we are unconsciously incompetent in an area. We were maybe blissfully ignorant for a while, but then we realized, well, I've got to get better at this. And as you work on it, you suddenly start to realize there are things that you don't know. And now you know what you don't know, and you move into the second step, which is conscious incompetence. Then you work on it and you get better, and you start to know what you need to do. You're consciously competent. It's hard. You have to work at it. And the goal is you start to become unconsciously competent. You can actually start to do things with very little effort, ultimately to the point where you can do them with really not thinking at all. Well, that's the promise. It's quite hard to do. And thankfully, we look back for thousands of years of insight, and we get a little comment here from Aristotle that gives us a clue as to how to do this. He says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So if you are trying to get really, really good at something, if you are trying to be something different, you're trying to be an expert at something, you've got to take a look at what are you consistently doing. Now, he would refer to these as habits, and this is maybe a whole side note, but some people would argue this wasn't Aristotle. He didn't actually say this. It was a phrase coined by an American philosopher named Will Durant studying Aristotle. So it's still attributed to his thinking. Well, this was very timely when I first learned about this quote because I was in a startup called I Run, You Run. A very dear friend of mine had started this business, and I joined him to help commercialize an app that was to help people get really, really good at a handful of things that drove their performance. And so we built our whole business on this notion of action speaking louder than goals. It is not what you intend, it's what you do that matters. Unfortunately, we learned that most people don't know what to repeatedly do. They are so focused on getting things done, they aren't thinking about what do I need to consistently do. Well, it's the things that you consistently do that actually result in the life you're experiencing. So we set about to study this, and we actually had leaders in particular come to us and say, what do the best leaders consistently do? We didn't know, so we did a study of 300 leaders, and we asked them, what are the 5 to 7 things you need to consistently do week in, week out to be your best? And we took a look at what they said. Now, initially, we expected to see them work on their company and work on their people. And we found that in the data. They definitely did actions on a weekly basis that drove the business and helped develop their people. Everything else I put into a bucket called miscellaneous. And there were lots of things there. I'd say about a third of the data was very personal. They mentioned, I need to work out, I need to sleep, I need to date my spouse, I need to have quiet time, I need to take care of my diet, or read to my kids. All of these wonderful personal things that, frankly, we just ignored. We thought nobody is going to pay us to come into their organization and focus on their personal habits. So we stuck to the business habits, we stuck to the professional development habits, and then along the way, we met an executive coach. And she said, oh my gosh, you guys, well, frankly, you're completely missing the boat. You're ignoring the third that powers the other 2/3. It was like the inwardly sound lesson. And in fact, we discovered sort of an iceberg principle that really led to the idea of using the iceberg as a leadership model that said that the things you do in your private life build the capacity to hold up your work life, to produce. And so we started to talk about these actions in really two buckets. What are the things below the surface that probably most people don't see? They don't even know if you did them, but they're often in your personal life that give you the power, the influence, the engagement, the focus, the energy to work. And then, are you consistently doing the work things that you need to do to get the results that you want? So, again, hearkening back to this idea of the iceberg as a leadership model, which we discussed earlier, what we realize is the things that we need to do to lead the business and lead the people, those are the production actions. Those are things that people can see us do at work. But they're held up by the things that we typically don't share. The things that we do at home, the things that maybe even, our spouses and family members aren't aware of whether or not we're doing. But it's the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves. Ultimately, we also tried to figure out, how do we measure these? How do we create sort of a dashboard, if you will? And so at that time, we had this accountability app that gave you a score each week for whether or not you did all of your activities. It was a score out of 100. And we put them together. We put both the capacity and the production activities on the same scoreboard, and it all produced one score. And the problem was that didn't really help you manage them. So we hearkened to an example of racing a car. And he said, what if you only had one number that represented how optimally that car is racing? Well, the driver is not going to know what to do, because the driver has to decide, do I actually push down the accelerator or the brake? And what we realized is we've got to know these two things separately. We need to know how much fuel is in the tank. That's really a measure of our capacity. And we need to know, are we revving the engine? Are we doing the hard things at work to expend the fuel to get the results that we want? Are we racing hard enough? And so ultimately, we encourage people to actually create two dashboards, a capacity dashboard and a production dashboard. The question for you is, what would be on your capacity dashboard? Just pause this, discuss it as a group. What are the behaviors, what are the activities that refill your tank, that give you the strength to perform at your best? That's some best life behaviors. And then, what are the behaviors you need to consistently do to rev the engine, to really have maximum output and experience best work? Pause, discuss those, and then restart. All right, I would love to know what you came up with. Here's what we typically discussed. On the capacity side, there is a predictable set of behaviors. They are the things that you need to do to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, which probably all sound familiar if you went through our previous lessons. That's essentially deconstructing the high performance pyramid from the Human Performance Institute, and financially. This is one thing that wasn't discussed by HBI, but we saw with our clients. If you are deeply in debt, if you are not covering your bills and you're carrying financial stress to work, it is impacting your ability to produce. So what are the things you consistently do on a week in, week out basis? Well, you probably mentioned these things, but you need to sleep. You need to work out. You need to hydrate. You need to physically take care of the machine. Then you need to work on your relationships. You need to make sure there's some margin in there. You need to check in with your belief system. Maybe that looks like quiet time for you. Maybe that looks like recounting your goals or your purpose statement. And then as well, you probably need to work your budget. You probably need to make sure, and you're checking in with your financial plan to make sure you're on track. How do we make sure that we are spending less than we make? That is a key to keeping enough gas in the tank to perform. All right, what'd you come up with on the production side? Here, again, I'm kind of curious. Could look like a lot of things. You might say, well, gosh, it just depends on my job. Yes, it does. But ultimately, we created a little acronym here called GROWTH. And we said, regardless of where you sit, there are probably some things that you should be doing every week to get better, to contribute to top-line growth. Now, if you're in sales, that's easy. That might be going out and, getting new customers or selling more products to existing customers. But not everybody's in sales, and yet we all still drive the growth of the business. So what is it that we do that helps drive the growth of the business? It might be taking care of people, it might be taking care of your team, it might be coming up with new ideas or helping launch new products or finishing projects. And then there's something you need to do each week to deepen relationships. There's something you need to do each week to stay organized on a daily basis and make sure your time is going against your highest priorities. There is something that you, at your core, get paid to do. I would call that the work part of your job. Are you really clear on what is the most important work activity you need to do each and every week, and do enough of it to be turning the crank to be actually producing at a high level? The last two, these are like the finer tuning, but are you thinking enough? Are you getting time to stay sharp, learn, stay current, become a thought leader. That could be just even 10 minutes a week, 10 minutes a day. Are you reading an article ever to make sure that you're on the front edge of the thinking? And then the final thing is this idea of hire. What are you doing? What's your special sauce that every week is just setting you apart a little bit? For a lot of people, I've heard that's thank you notes. It could be, I'm going to just share something fun. I'm going to do a random act of kindness. But like, what's the little thing that takes the least amount of time, but maybe sets you apart? Okay, that ultimately is your formula. This is your success formula. And what we'd say is, it's not about work-life balance. It is about work-life multiplication. Your best work and best life multiply to deliver maximum results. All right, so here's where I want you to challenge you. I'm going to ask that you hit pause in just a second. Spend just a few minutes identifying what are the few things you could more consistently be doing to experience more best work and best life. And then we're going to have you go to a couple discussion questions. The key thing before I get there, though, is that there are a couple things I want to discuss. Going back to our original 10 falsehoods. Number 8, personal effectiveness requires an environment of accountability. It does not require a highly attuned level of self-discipline. The reason I share that is because when we studied the behaviors, the consistent behaviors of people, and we got to thousands and thousands of people, we found that almost everybody quits. It's not about self-discipline. In fact, when we studied soldiers and athletes in the workplace, we found that they underperformed their peers when it came to self-discipline, even though they knew it was discipline that got them to where they once were. It's not self-discipline. It's not you have to do it on your own. It's that you need to get together with some people and submit to each other. Leverage each other's motivation. Check in midweek with each other on a regular basis and create an environment of accountability. We found that habits are largely misunderstood. It's rituals that are an essential part of personal effectiveness. It's consistently doing what you need to do to be who you want to be. We often think that habits will get us there. If we can just gut it out for a few weeks, we'll be fine. There's a lot of misnomers, and if you're interested in this, we've got another session called the Best Work, Best Life Challenge, where we unpack some of these falsehoods around habits and a whole concept called automaticity that is largely misunderstood. Please don't rely on habits. Set rituals. Use tools that will remind you and help you measure and track whether or not you're doing the things you need to do. And then finally is how accountability works. We found it's actually weakest among peers who care about each other. And so we want to think it's greatest. Somebody would understand me. The reality is they're more likely to commiserate if they care about you and they know what you're going through. So we need to find people who love us but are actually outside of our work. One of the most powerful accountability partners you could have would be a child. They love you, but they're going to tell you you're not doing what you said you were going to do. If you will simply track and share with them what you did, they can be amazing accountability partners because they care, but they're ruthless. Another thing would be a senior leader. If you can just simply set some intentions and then share whether or not you did them with a boss's boss, a boss's boss's boss, get to a department head, somebody who you really respect, that is going to creep into how you think about doing what you need to do. When we share it with our peers, often we find that we commiserate. Although one more quick and final comment about the accountability partner thing is even the weakest accountability partner is still better than no accountability partner. So if you do need to lean on a peer because you don't have access to a boss's boss's boss or you don't have a kid, that's totally fine. Any human being can make for a worthwhile accountability partner. Just want to point out that some are better than others. So if you really want to amp it up, get yourself under the influence of somebody who's not likely to commiserate with you. All right, I hope that was helpful. That's just kind of debriefing on those key things. Here's your final reflection questions, and then I want to ask you to pause and discuss. First of all, from this entire series, what was your biggest takeaway? That's worth some discussion. Number 2, what idea was most challenging for you, whether it was in margin, mission, mastery, or any other part of the series? And then finally, what action will you take by when? What is the thing you're going to start to consistently do? If you want to change who you are, Aristotle says you got to change what you consistently do. A lot of people say, I'm not a human doing, I'm a human being, I just need to be. Well, guess what? You are what you repeatedly do. So what action do you need to start consistently taking by when? All right, at this point now, pause. Thank you so much. Have a great discussion. And if you want to go further, I've got another series on leading others. I would invite you to jump over there. Otherwise, I hope that you experience a little bit more of your best work and best life.